I was 16 when it all started, and looking back now, it feels like it happened to someone else. Someone younger, more naive, someone who believed that love could be simple, even when it wasn't supposed to be. His name was Daniel, and he wasn't just any guy, he was my stepbrother. When our parents got married, we were thrown into each other's lives like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. I remember the first time I saw him, standing in the hallway of our new house, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. He was 18, taller than anyone I'd ever dated, with that brooding look that made him seem untouchable. But there was something else, something in the way he looked at me that made my heart skip a beat. At first, it was just innocent flirting, harmless, I thought. We'd exchange glances across the dinner table, our parents oblivious to the sparks flying between us. It was thrilling, the idea that we were keeping something just for ourselves. I would catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, and the way his eyes would linger on mine made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before. One night, after our parents had gone to bed, we were sitting on the couch watching some movie neither of us cared about. I remember the way the room felt, thick with unspoken tension. The silence stretched between us until he finally broke it. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "what are we doing?" I looked at him, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. "I don't know," I whispered. But we both knew. We'd been skirting the edge of something dangerous, something we both wanted but couldn't admit. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine, and that simple touch sent shivers down my spine. "This is wrong," he said, but his hand didn't move away. Instead, he laced his fingers through mine, holding on like he was afraid to let go. "We can't," I said, even as I leaned closer to him. But then he kissed me, and all the reasons why we shouldn't disappeared. It was soft at first, hesitant, like we were testing the waters. But then it deepened, and I felt like I was falling into something I couldn't control. His hands were in my hair, pulling me closer, and I melted into him, all the fear and doubt dissolving in the heat of the moment. When we finally pulled away, breathless and flushed, we stared at each other, the reality of what we'd just done hanging heavy in the air. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't have an answer, and neither did I. But we both knew that there was no going back from this. We had crossed a line, and our lives would never be the same. In the weeks that followed, we fell into a routine that was as intoxicating as it was terrifying. We were careful, always careful, to keep our secret from our parents. The fear of being caught added to the thrill, making every stolen glance, every secret touch, feel like a rush of adrenaline. We became experts at sneaking around. After school, while our parents were still at work, we'd find excuses to be alone. Sometimes it was as simple as going to his room under the pretense of studying, but we both knew that books were the last thing on our minds. "I hate this," I'd say sometimes, after we'd pulled away from a heated kiss, both of us breathless. "Hate what?" he'd ask, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Hiding," I'd reply, my voice laced with frustration. "I hate that we have to keep this a secret." But he'd just smile that crooked smile of his and pull me close. "We have to, Sarah. You know that." I did know. But that didn't make it any easier. It wasn't just the hiding that was hard, it was the constant fear that someone would find out. There were close calls, like the time our mom walked in on us a split second after we'd jumped apart, trying to look as innocent as possible. Or the time at a family gathering when Daniel had absent-mindedly brushed his hand against mine, and I had to quickly pull away before anyone noticed. But for all the fear and guilt, there was also something intoxicating about it all. The way he'd look at me when no one else was watching, the way his touch would set my skin on fire. It was addictive, the way he made me feel, like I was the only person in the world who mattered. There was one night that stands out more than any other. We were in his room, the door locked, the only light coming from the lamp on his nightstand. We were sitting on his bed, just talking, but there was an undercurrent to our conversation, something that was always there but rarely spoken. "Do you ever think about what happens next?" I asked, my voice hesitant. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" I mean, what happens when this ends? When we have to stop? He didn't answer right away, and the silence between us felt heavy. Finally, he sighed and looked away. I don't know, Sarah. I try not to think about it. But you do think about it, I pressed, needing to hear him say it. Of course I do, he admitted. But thinking about it doesn't change anything. We can't be together, not forever. You know that. His words were like a punch to the gut, and I had to fight to keep the tears at bay. I know, I whispered. But it still hurts. He pulled me into his arms, holding me close. I don't want to hurt you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I don't know how to stop this without hurting both of us. And that was the crux of it. We were in too deep, and there was no way out that didn't end in heartbreak. The end came slowly, like the slow decay of something beautiful. It was inevitable, like a storm that you can see on the horizon but can't avoid. We both knew it was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. We were sitting in the park one afternoon, a rare moment when we could be alone without fear of being caught. I remember the way the sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. It should have been a perfect day, but there was a tension between us that neither of us could ignore. We need to talk, Daniel said, breaking the silence that had stretched between us. My heart sank at his words. I knew what was coming, but I wasn't ready to face it. About what? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. About us. About what we're doing. I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Why now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because we can't keep doing this, Sarah. It's not fair to either of us. But I don't want to stop, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. I don't want to lose you. You're not going to lose me, he said, reaching out to take my hand. But we can't keep pretending that this can last. We're not kids anymore. We need to think about the future. The future, I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. What future? We don't have one. I know, he said, his voice heavy with regret. And that's why we need to end this before it destroys us. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to accept that the one person who had made me feel alive, who had made me feel loved, was telling me that it was over. But deep down, I knew he was right. Is this it, then? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. It has to be. We sat there in silence for a long time, neither of us willing to make the first move to leave. But eventually, he stood up, pulling me to my feet. We'll always be family, he said, trying to sound reassuring. We'll always have that. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. I watched him walk away, feeling like a part of me was being torn out. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. After Daniel and I ended things, I thought the pain would fade over time. But instead, it lingered, a constant ache that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just that I missed him, though I did, desperately, it was that I felt lost. For 2 years, he had been my world, my everything. Without him, I didn't know who I was. I tried to move on, to throw myself into my schoolwork, to hang out with friends, but nothing filled the void he had left behind. I went through the motions of life, but I wasn't really living. I was just existing. I started dating, hoping that I could find someone who could make me feel the way Daniel had. But every relationship ended the same way, with me feeling empty and unsatisfied. No one else could compare to him, and I was left with a growing sense of frustration and despair. It wasn't just the emotional connection I missed, it was the physical one too. Being with Daniel had awakened something in me, a hunger that no one else could satisfy. I found myself craving that intensity, that passion, but no one else seemed to understand what I needed. I started to feel like there was something wrong with me, like I was broken in some fundamental way. Why couldn't I just be happy with someone else? Why couldn't I let go of the past and move on? The years passed, but the pain didn't fade. I graduated from college, got a job, tried to build a life for myself, but the shadow of what I had lost was always there, lurking in the background. I tried therapy, hoping that talking to someone would help me make sense of my feelings. But it only made me realize how deeply the experience had scarred me. I was still grieving, still trying to come to terms with the fact that the one person who had made me feel alive was the one person I could never have. By the time I turned 27, I had all but given up on finding real love. I had been in and out of relationships, but none of them had lasted. It wasn't that I didn't want to find someone, I did. But every time I tried to let someone in, I found myself pulling away. I would start off strong, feeling a spark of attraction, a glimmer of hope that maybe this time would be different. But it never was. As soon as things started to get serious, I would start to feel trapped, suffocated by the weight of their expectations. It wasn't just that I was afraid of being hurt again, though that was part of it. It was that no one else could make me feel the way Daniel had. No one else could ignite that same fire, that same passion. And without that, everything else felt hollow. I started to believe that maybe I was destined to be alone, that maybe I had used up all my chances at love with Daniel. Maybe I had set the bar too high, and no one else could ever reach it. It was a lonely existence, but I convinced myself that it was better than settling for something less. I told myself that I was strong, that I didn't need anyone else to make me happy. But deep down, I knew that I was lying to myself. The truth was, I was terrified that I would never find someone who could make me feel the way he had. Terrified that I would spend the rest of my life searching for something that didn't exist. It wasn't until I met Alex that I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. He was different from anyone I had dated before, kind, patient, understanding. He didn't try to rush me or push me into anything I wasn't ready for. He just let me be, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. We met at a mutual friend's party, and I was immediately drawn to his easygoing nature. He made me laugh, something I hadn't done in a long time, and I found myself relaxing around him in a way I hadn't with anyone else. At first, I was hesitant to let him in. I had been hurt so many times before, and I didn't want to go through that again. But Alex was persistent, in the gentlest way possible. He didn't push, but he didn't give up either. He just kept showing up, kept being there for me, until I finally started to believe that maybe I could trust him. We started dating, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't the intense, all-consuming passion I had felt with Daniel, but it was something else, something steady, something real. But as things started to get more serious, I found myself pulling back, just like I always did. I was afraid that I would ruin things, that I would never be able to give him what he wanted, what he deserved. One night, after we had been dating for a few months, I finally told him the truth. We were sitting on the couch in his apartment, the room dimly lit by the glow of the TV. I turned to him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Alex," I said, my voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked at me, his expression serious. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "There's a reason why I've had such a hard time with relationships. Why I've never been able to really let anyone in." He didn't say anything, just waited for me to continue. I could see the concern in his eyes, and it gave me the courage to keep going. When I was 16, I had a relationship with someone I shouldn't have. It lasted for 2 years, and it really messed me up. I could see the surprise on his face, but he didn't interrupt. He just let me talk. "It was with my stepbrother," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "We were young, and it was all so intense, so overwhelming. But it couldn't last. We knew that, but we didn't want to let go." I paused, looking down at my hands. When it ended, it broke me. I didn't know how to move on, how to find that same connection with anyone else. And I've been struggling with it ever since. There was a long silence, and I was afraid to look at him, afraid of what I might see in his eyes. But when he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. Sarah, he said, reaching out to take my hand, thank you for telling me. I can't imagine how hard that must have been for you. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. I looked up at him, tears welling up in my eyes. You're not angry? He shook his head. No, I'm not angry. I'm just sorry that you had to go through that. But you're not alone anymore. We can work through this together, if you're willing. And in that moment, I knew that I had found something worth fighting for. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew there would be days when the past would still haunt me. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could see a future for myself, one where I wasn't defined by what had happened, but by the choices I made moving forward. In the months that followed, I worked hard to confront my past and the hold it had over me. It wasn't easy. There were days when the memories would come flooding back, and I would feel that familiar sense of loss and longing. But with Alex by my side, I started to learn how to let go. We talked a lot, more than I had ever talked with anyone before. He was patient, always willing to listen, never judging me for the things I couldn't change. He encouraged me to keep going to therapy, to keep working on myself, and slowly, I started to feel like I was making progress. I began to realize that I didn't have to chase the intensity one had once felt with Daniel. That kind of passion was unsustainable, built on a foundation of secrecy and fear. What I had with Alex was different. It was steady, reliable, something I could build a life on. There were still moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I would ever truly be able to move on. But those moments became fewer and farther between, replaced by a growing sense of hope and possibility. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch of our apartment, watching the sunset, I turned to Alex and said something I had been afraid to say for a long time. I love you, I said, my voice steady. He looked at me, surprised, and then he smiled. I love you too, Sarah. It was the first time I had said those words to anyone since Daniel, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I believed that I could walk it without fear. Looking back now, at 27, I can see how far I've come. The girl I was at 16 is still a part of me, but she doesn't define me anymore. I've learned to accept what happened, to understand that it was a chapter in my life, but not the whole story. I found love again, real love, the kind that doesn't demand secrets or lies. It's a love that allows me to be myself, flaws and all, and it's something I'm grateful for every day. There are still days when the past creeps up on me, when I wonder what might have been if things had been different. But those days are fewer now, and they no longer hold the same power over me. I'm still a work in progress, but I'm learning to be okay with that. I've learned that healing isn't a straight line, that there will be setbacks and struggles, but that doesn't mean I'm not moving forward.